Our organization is here to help secure a peaceful, safe, secure, democratic Israel going forward. That's our goal, and I think we need a peaceful, safe, secure, democratic Palestinian state in order to achieve that.
This is Faith Complex, a dialogue about the entanglement of religion, politics, and art.
Hello, my name is Jacques Berlunblau of Georgetown University, and you're watching Faith Complex. Joining us today is Mr. Hadar Susskind, Director of Policy and Strategy at J Street.
Hello.
Mr. Susskind, it seems that everyone in Washington, D.C. and their cousin Shmuley is discussing something that goes by the name of J Street. What is J Street?
So J Street is a still relatively young organization. It's been around for 18 months, and it is the pro-Israel, pro-peace lobby. And the idea is really to be a new voice in the Jewish community that can bring people together who want to support Israel, but want to be able to question what might be specific policies that they disagree with.
Last month, you had a conference that set 1 million bloggers' fingers a-tapping across the world, especially in Israel and the United States. The weeks leading up to the conference were high drama. Why was there high drama in the weeks leading up to the conference?
I think the reason we had drama is that there are people who are nervous about it, who never minded those other voices on the left, those other progressive voices before, because they didn't feel that they were perhaps threatening their monopoly on being the voice, on deciding who it is who is dubbed pro-Israel.
Right. They were also nervous because some of the positions that J Street may or may not, and we'll get into this, have been associated with, do make mainstream Jews and many Israelis very, very nervous. Maybe we can talk about what some of those were. I think J Street's response to the Gaza war was a little problematic for many Jews. Why don't you tell us what your official response was to Operation Cast Lead, and then we'll discuss the critique.
Well, J Street did come out and call for a ceasefire earlier than the Israeli government did. And they did feel that it was problematic and perhaps disproportionate. That it was very clear. The first line of J Street's official statement on this was that Israel had a right to defend itself, always has a right to defend itself, and was under serious threat from more than 8,000 rockets over these many years. But the question that J Street asked then, and that we always ask, is less about who's to blame and who's right or wrong, and more about what is this doing to get us to the ultimate goal. And the question we raised is, was Israel's response effective? Did it do what is best for Israel?
What would constitute effective responses to aggression by this group?
The answer of dealing with Hamas is obviously a very, very complicated one, and if I knew it in detail, I would probably be running the Israeli army right now. But I do think, when Israel looks at dealing with the rocket attacks and how they should respond to that, and they should, the question they need to be asking themselves is what they're doing going to make Hamas less able to do this in the future? And I fear that what happened in the last cycle was a lot of death and a lot of violence and very little decrease in Hamas's capacity to continue to wage terror attacks.
But sometimes I just think that death and violence, as far as Hamas is concerned, it's all good. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that about the PA, but I find that with a lot of radical Islamist groups, that death and violence is a good thing. And the more of it that there is on both sides, paradoxically and in a very twisted manner, it actually accrues to Hamas's greater good.
Well, that may well be, which is why I believe that Israel, which thankfully doesn't share that opinion, needs to always be as explicitly thoughtful as possible in order to not let Hamas achieve exactly that same goal. And there are times where military force is necessary, where Israel can and should defend itself, but there's also a line of thinking about not just what's right, or does somebody deserve it, or did they bring it upon themselves, but what is going to be best for Israel going forward? What is going to keep Hamas from waging future attacks? What is going to build the political support needed to help secure Israel? And that's really the question that I raise about it.
Does Hamas share Israel's ultimate goal? I mean, I believe, and I think you believe, most Israelis really want peace. Sometimes I look at Hamas and I read their charter, and I don't know if they want peace. Are we talking about two groups that share the same goals?
My answer to that would be a clear, unequivocal no. I don't believe that Hamas shares Israel's goals. I do believe that the Palestinian Authority leadership does. But I'm happy to tell you what I think. As somebody who served as a special forces soldier in the Israeli army, I have no doubt that Israel was right in responding. My concern is what their response was, and again, whether it was effective in achieving the goal. You can look at the number of rockets that rained down during the Hudna, the ceasefire before that, and since then. You can look at the fact that Hamas has said, and it appears to be verified, that they have completely restocked their arms since then, and ask not whether it was right or wrong, but whether it was effective. And I think that's the question that really needs to be asked.
Are you as optimistic about Iran today as you might have been, let's say, 9 months ago? I know J Street had a sort of let's not resort to force approach to negotiations with the Iranians. Is J Street's position starting to shift, given what we've seen, this massive shipment of arms, for example, that was en route to Israel's enemies? Does that change your mind in any way?
Well, for one, J Street was one of, I think, 3 organizations yesterday to issue a public statement, along with the American Jewish Committee and the Israel Project, applauding the Israeli Navy in their efforts to keep their shores safe and secure. You asked me if I'm as optimistic as I was 9 months ago. I was not very optimistic 9 months ago.
Right.
I'm a little bit more optimistic now that I do think we have seen what may be the first signs of some progress, willingness in Iran to ship some of their fuel out of the country to be processed. And again, we're not there yet, and I wouldn't want to overstate it. But our position has been we need to see if really serious, tough diplomatic negotiations can work.
But if there were an Olympic event called Gaming the World System, or the Comedy of Nations, gaming the system of the
silver medal at least.
At least a silver medal.
At least.
At least a silver medal.
Yeah.
How much longer do we just let the Iranians do what they're very good at doing, which is ticking down the clock and salting away time and triangulating and double triangulating?
That's tricky.
How much longer?
I don't have the simple number answer for you, but I will tell you that I believe that it's not long, and there need to be serious limits on it. And this administration, together with leadership from the P5+1, the other countries that are engaged in this issue, need to be very, very clear with the Iranians. There are real deadlines, there are real consequences to those deadlines, and we need to be moving concretely with actions, not just words, toward de-escalating this crisis.
Okay, so what happened at the conference? Tell us about the conference.
We were thrilled and somewhat overwhelmed to have 1,500 people show up for the conference. We brought together an incredible array of voices, primarily Jewish, but also other American voices, Christian, Muslim, some participants from Israel, some from Europe, from places in the Arab world. And we really felt an incredible energy and hopefully a change in showing people here in Washington that there is a serious constituency for a pro-Israel, pro-peace voice that wants to see vigorous U.S. leadership in helping get the parties to the table and to real issues.
And how would you respond to the critics who said, pro-peace, yup, yeah, they're pro-peace, but they're not pro-Israel? How would you respond to them?
Well, I'd start off by just saying they're wrong. I mean, it's very simple. It's not, it's not maybe here, there. It's clear. It is pro-Israel, pro-peace. That part comes first. I believe deeply in human rights for all people, in the need for a Palestinian state, but our organization is not here for the purpose of achieving that goal. Our organization is here to help secure a peaceful, safe, secure, democratic Israel going forward. That's our goal, and I think we need a peaceful, safe, secure, democratic Palestinian state in order to achieve that. But pro-Israel is at the very core of what we do.
Okay, I, like many observers of J Street, was actually quite surprised, and I want to say pleasantly surprised. It seemed to me that the leadership of J Street was centering itself, was moving to the political center, and that might have meant purging some of the radical fringe. The critique was made that the rank and file might actually be out of sync with the leadership. Is there any validity to that?
So, again, this was the first conference, and it's a new voice. I know there were people who came to the conference looking for the furthest out people that they could find to write about, and they did find some of them. And we had 1,500 people there, and J Street as an organization is not at a spot where we know everyone who registered for the conference. People wanted to come. It was an open registration. There probably were some people there who described themselves as anti-Zionist. That's certainly not the position of J Street. It's not the position of our leadership, and it's not the position of our rank and file.
Anti-Zionism has no place within the J Street big tent.
Absolutely. people who aren't comfortable being pro-Israel are not part of the J Street consensus.
My fear is, being a professor and working on college campuses my entire career, I've seen the face of the anti-Israel movement, and it is entrenched, and it is large, and I feel it is completely unreasonable. I'm talking about the hardcore anti-Zionist, anti-Israel movement. My fear for J Street is you, not because you wanted to, you somehow emerge as useful idiots for folks that really don't have Israel's concerns in mind, and you become the blocking back for various anti-Israel forces, which I repeat, in the academy at least, are very, very well organized and very intent on achieving their goal.
I'll tell you, we've used the blocking back analogy as well.
With Obama, right.
But for President Obama,
exactly,
who I think is a strong pro-Israel leader and really wants to do what hasn't been done out of the White House anytime recently, which is show some serious leadership in bringing these parties together. Again, I think there are people out there who like that there's a J Street because they think it's not pro-Israel, but they are wrong. It's clear, it's unequivocal. Those people who have anti-Israel goals, who are anti-Zionist, do not have a happy home at J Street.
So you quickly disabuse them of the idea that this might be a base of operations.
Absolutely. You know, we had, I believe, 2 women there who were, affiliated with Code Pink. They shared their opinions at sessions. They were not on panels. They paid, they registered, they came to the conference. They're welcome to share their opinion. That doesn't make it our opinion. And we were quite clear that it is not our opinion.
Okay. What puzzled some in the aftermath of the conference was the Goldstone Report, and I believe it was actually your comment that you refused to either condemn or embrace the Goldstone Report. I'm pretty ready to condemn. Tell me why you weren't ready to condemn the Goldstone Report.
Well, there's a couple different issues. There's the Goldstone Report, and there's the resolution in the United Nations, and then there was the congressional resolution. The 3 are different. I was talking at the time, I believe, about the congressional resolution, and our opinion on that was, in fact, in that middle ground, which, in Washington is relatively typical. We said we did not support it. That is different than opposing it. We did not urge members of Congress to vote no. We didn't urge our members to rally in opposition to it. And the reason for that was that the bottom line of that congressional resolution called for the U.S. to work against any one-sided biased resolutions coming out of the United Nations in relation to Israel. And we agree with that. And we think that the resolution that came out of the Human Rights Council was biased and one-sided, and the U.S. should work against it. So we agreed with that bottom line.
But we always speak about unity in the Jewish community. It seems to me the theoretical possibility has at least been raised that on some substantive issues, there's a lot of daylight between what American Jews believe and what the majority of Israelis believe, which I think would be ultimately sad for Judaism, but maybe it's true. Do you think it's true?
Do I think it's true? I think the possibility has been raised, for sure. I also think, and J Street recognizes, there are also times where there are American interests that may not coincide with those of a specific Israeli policy or a specific Israeli government. And that does create tensions sometimes. In terms of unity, I mean, that's a big question that people ask about J Street in general. Should there be another voice? Should we just have this, what I would call a mythical one voice in support of Israel? I don't think there's one voice and one opinion in the Jewish community on any issue.
Sometimes I wonder if dialogue is always good. And one of the tendencies in the world Jewish community has been for Jews to keep their disagreements, and we have many because we're Jews after all, to keep their disagreements under wraps. So I'm just laying out the possibility that maybe talking, with no G, talking about all our differences as Jews, sometimes it's not in our best interests as Jews. Or would you categorically disagree with that?
I think I would disagree. I also think there's a difference between dialogue and differing opinions. I do think dialogue is good, and dialogue probably does take place quietly. Now, quietly, I think, should be within our Jewish institutions and within our public life. But there's also a difference.
My father will say, well, these are conversations that Jews should have amongst themselves. We can't share these with the outside world because we have so many enemies. The older you get, the more you kind of see the logic of that. Should the younger generation change the nature of the conversation about Judaism?
Well, there is certainly an interesting generational piece to J Street, and we discussed it at the conference, that there are those who, have lived through, not so many 48 anymore, but 67 and 73 and other moments where, the existential crisis and the issue of we must all be a unified voice in supporting Israel. And you have many people who are younger, who didn't live through those, where they don't feel that existential threat on the day-to-day. And if they do feel an existential threat, what they think that threat is is the continued occupation and a continued Palestinian-Israeli crisis that doesn't let Israel develop fully and peacefully.
I was a little chagrined to notice that you did not insist that folks associated with J Street U refer to themselves as pro-Israel and pro-peace. Why not? Why couldn't they be pro-Israel and pro-peace, and you'd make that an absolute condition of being a member of the J Street U group?
Being pro-Israel is an absolute condition of being a member of the J Street U group. Using the tagline pro-Israel, pro-peace, which J Street proudly does, is not something that J Street U has adopted. That's not a policy statement or a core belief. Right? That's a bumper sticker. J Street uses that statement. We believe in it very deeply. J Street U does have the same baseline policies. It is a pro-Israel organization. Whether they want to use that phrase or not is entirely up to them. It's actually up to the individual campus communities whether they want to use the phrase. But in the definition of what the organization is, it is a pro-Israel organization.
Tell us where J Street is going to be 3 to 5 years from now.
That's a good question. It's a big part of what I'm working on right now, is really bringing our different bodies, our different areas of activity together into an integrated political plan. You know, my hope is that 3 to 5 years from now, J Street is working close with the Israeli government, working close with the American government and the Palestinian Authority on actualizing a peace agreement. That's what I would like to see. That's what I think we desperately, desperately need in the region. I think President Obama is working toward that. And I believe that leadership in the region wants to see that. Whether they're always willing to take the difficult steps, and they are difficult, but to take those steps that we need to get there, I think remains an open question. But I certainly hope to see us there in 3 to 5 years.
All right, Hadar Susskind, I wish you well. Bring us that good voice for progressive, liberal, mainstream Jews, and I think J Street will have performed a mitzvah for the Jewish community. Thank you so much for appearing on Faith Complex.
Thank you.
Join us next time when we talk to Michael Goldfarb, the online editor of the Weekly Standard.